The fluorescent lights of the county clerk's office hummed overhead as Dorothy Fisher stood in line, her weathered hands clasped together. On her left ring finger sat a simple gold band, so thin it looked like it might snap if she wasn't careful. The metal had worn smooth over the decades, the engraving inside barely visible anymore. She'd been standing there for nearly 40 minutes, waiting to file paperwork for her late husband's estate, when the man behind her let out an exaggerated sigh. He was younger, maybe 50, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than her monthly pension. His phone buzzed constantly, and he kept glancing at his Rolex with growing irritation. When Dorothy's papers slipped from her trembling fingers and scattered across the floor, he didn't help. Instead, he muttered something under his breath about these people wasting everyone's time. As Dorothy bent down to gather her documents, her wedding ring caught the light, and the man actually laughed. "Where are you watching from today?" Dorothy had learned long ago not to let cruel words pierce too deep. At 78, she'd survived worse than a stranger's mockery in a government office. She collected her papers without looking up, her knees protesting as she straightened. The man behind her was still on his phone, speaking loudly about some real estate deal worth millions. His name was Marcus Webb, though she wouldn't learn that until later. All she knew in that moment was that his voice carried the particular confidence of someone who'd never known real hardship. "Next," the clerk called, and Dorothy shuffled forward. Her hands shook slightly as she presented her documents. The clerk, a kind woman named Patricia who'd helped Dorothy before, gave her a sympathetic smile. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Mrs. Fisher. How long were you and Harold married?" 56 years this past June, Dorothy said softly. Her voice still caught when she talked about Harold. 3 months since the funeral, and grief still ambushed her at unexpected moments. The way morning light hit their empty kitchen table, the silence where his laughter used to be. Behind her, Marcus Webb snorted. 56 years? Must have been quite the investment. His tone suggested jewelry, not love. Patricia shot him a sharp look, but he didn't notice. He was already typing something on his phone, probably broadcasting his impatience to the world. Dorothy finished her business and turned to leave. As she passed Marcus, she heard him say into his phone, "Yeah, stuck behind some old woman with a ring that looks like it came from a gumball machine. Probably doesn't even know what real gold looks like." Something in Dorothy's chest tightened. Not anger exactly. Sadness maybe. She paused just for a moment and looked at him directly. His eyes were cold, distracted. She wanted to tell him something, but the words wouldn't come. What could you say to someone who measured worth in dollars? She left quietly, her worn shoes squeaking against the linoleum floor. Marcus forgot about her immediately. He had 3 more appointments that afternoon, a charity gala that evening, and a board meeting in the morning. His life moved fast, measured in deals closed and zeros added to his net worth. He'd built his fortune in commercial real estate, starting with a modest inheritance and turning it into an empire through ruthless negotiation and an eye for undervalued properties. He drove a Tesla, owned a penthouse downtown, and wore suits custom-made in Milan. His dating profile listed his net worth before his hobbies. But something about that old woman's face stayed with him as he left the clerk's office. Maybe it was the way she'd looked at him, not with anger but with something worse, disappointment. Like she'd expected better and found herself unsurprised by the letdown. It irritated him more than it should have. That evening, at the charity gala, Marcus found himself distracted. He was supposed to be networking, making connections, being seen. The event was raising money for veterans, which was good for his image. He'd bought a table for $10,000, not because he cared particularly about veterans, but because his PR team suggested it. Between the champagne and small talk, his mind kept drifting back to that worn gold band on the old woman's finger. "You seem distant tonight," said Rebecca Hartwell, a board member from one of the non-profits he occasionally donated to. She was sharp, in her late 60s, with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. "Just tired," Marcus said, forcing a smile. "Long day, Rebecca studied him over her wine glass. "I've known you 3 years, Marcus. You're never just tired. What's bothering you?" He almost told her. Almost. But what would he say? That an old woman's cheap ring had gotten under his skin? that he couldn't stop thinking about the sadness in her eyes. It sounded ridiculous even in his own head. Instead, he changed the subject, asked about her grandchildren, and let the moment pass. But later that night, alone in his penthouse with the city lights spread below him like scattered diamonds, Marcus couldn't sleep. He found himself Googling old wedding rings, then vintage gold bands, then, inexplicably, wedding rings worn thin. The search results showed him couples married 50, 60, even 70 years. People who'd worn their rings so long, the gold had literally worn away from decades of devotion. Something about that struck him as both foreign and strangely moving. His own marriage had lasted 3 years before ending in an expensive divorce. He'd removed his ring the day the papers were signed and never looked back. The next morning, Marcus did something he never did. He went back to the county clerk's office. Patricia looked surprised to see him return.
"Forget something yesterday?"
she asked, her tone professional but cool. She clearly remembered his rudeness. "The old woman," Marcus said. "The one with the worn wedding ring." "Dorothy, I think you called her? Do you know her?" Patricia's expression shifted to something guarded. "Why?" He didn't have a good answer. I wanted to apologize for what I said. It was inappropriate." Patricia studied him for a long moment, deciding something. Finally, she sighed. "Dorothy Fisher comes in here every few months to handle paperwork. Her husband passed away recently, Harold. He was a good man. They used to come in together before he got too sick." She paused. "She lives over on Maple Street, the senior apartments. Building C. But I'm not giving you her apartment number, so don't ask." Marcus thanked her and left. He told himself he'd just drop off a note, maybe some flowers. A simple apology. But when he arrived at the senior apartment complex, he found Dorothy sitting on a bench outside, feeding pigeons from a paper bag of breadcrumbs. She looked smaller in the daylight, more fragile. Her hand still trembled slightly as she tossed the bread. "Mrs. Fisher?" he said, approaching carefully. She looked up, and he saw recognition flicker in her eyes. Not fear, not anger, just quiet acknowledgement. "The man from the clerk's office," she said. "Yes, I wanted to apologize. What I said yesterday was cruel and unnecessary." "I'm sorry," Dorothy nodded slowly. "Apology accepted." She turned back to the pigeons. Marcus should have left then. He'd done what he came to do. But instead he found himself asking, "May I sit?" She gestured to the bench. For a moment they sat in silence, watching the pigeons peck at the breadcrumbs. Dorothy's wedding ring caught the morning sun, and Marcus couldn't help staring at it. Up close he could see how thin it really was, worn almost translucent in places. "You were married a long time," he said finally. 56 years, Dorothy repeated. Would have been 57 in June. That's rare these days. It was rare in our day too. She smiled faintly. People think the past was simpler, that marriages just worked back then. But it took work, every day, sometimes every hour, choosing love over pride. Marcus didn't know what to say to that. His marriage had failed because neither of them had been willing to choose anything over their own ambitions. In the end, splitting assets had been easier than splitting time. "Your ring," he said carefully. "It's very thin." 56 years of wear, Dorothy said. "Harold and I put these on when we were 22. We never took them off, not once." She touched the band gently, rotating it on her finger. "His wore thin too. They buried him with it." "You could replace it," Marcus said, then immediately regretted the words. "I mean, if you wanted. A new ring, something stronger." Dorothy's smile turned sad. "Replace it? No, dear. This ring is irreplaceable." She looked at him then, really looked at him. "You think it's about the gold, don't you? You think I keep wearing this worn-out thing because I can't afford better? I didn't mean it's all right. Most people think like you do. They see the world in terms of value, worth, cost. But this ring," she held up her hand, letting the light play across the thin band. "This ring survived something that should have destroyed it. That should have destroyed all of us." Marcus felt something shift in his chest. "What do you mean?" Dorothy was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Do you know what Bergen-Belsen was, Mr. Webb, Marcus Webb? And yes, the concentration camp." "My parents were there," Dorothy said softly. "They were Polish Jews. They lost everything, their families, their home, their names almost. They became numbers, but my father, he had these 2 wedding bands, his and my mother's. When they were taken to the camp, he hid them. Do you know where? Marcus shook his head, unable to speak. He swallowed them, Dorothy said. Every morning for 2 years, he would swallow them and then retrieve them. Over and over. Because if the guards found gold, they'd take it, and he'd already lost everything else. Those rings were the only thing that proved they'd been human once, that they'd chosen each other in love before the world went mad. If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. The rings survived. They survived. Thinner than they started, damaged by stomach acid and trauma, but they survived. Just like my parents. Dorothy's voice trembled slightly. They were liberated in April 1945. They came to America with nothing but those rings and each other. They had me 2 years later. When I turned 22, my mother took me aside and gave me her ring. She said, "This survived hell so you could wear it in freedom. Don't ever take it for granted." Marcus couldn't breathe. The world had tilted sideways, and you've worn it ever since. Every single day, Dorothy said. Through my wedding, through raising 3 children, through my husband's illness and death. This ring has seen more love and more horror than most people can imagine. It's worn thin because it's been lived in, because it's real, she looked at him. So when you mocked it yesterday, when you judged it as worthless, you weren't just insulting me. You were dismissing a love that survived the worst humanity can offer. Marcus Webb had built an empire by staying composed. Negotiations worth millions, hostile takeovers, cutthroat boardroom battles. He never flinched, never showed weakness. But sitting on that bench next to Dorothy Fisher, her words hanging in the morning air between them, he felt something crack in his chest. His hands were shaking, actually shaking. "I didn't know," he said, and the words came out barely above a whisper. "I'm so sorry. I had no idea. How could you?" Dorothy said gently. There was no accusation in her voice, which somehow made it worse. "You looked at the ring and saw cheap gold. You didn't see the story. Most people don't." Marcus thought about his penthouse, his cars, his custom suits. The Rolex on his wrist had cost $40,000. He'd bought it because he could, because it signaled success, because wearing expensive things made him feel important. But when was the last time he'd felt something real? When was the last time anything he owned had meant more than its price tag? "Tell me more," he said. "About your parents, please." Dorothy settled back against the bench. A pigeon landed near her feet, hopeful, and she absently tossed it a crumb. "My father was a watchmaker before the war. His name was Samuel. My mother was Anna, and she played violin. They met at a concert in Warsaw, fell in love over shared books and long walks. Simple people living simple lives." She paused, her eyes distant. "The Nazis took that all away. My father watched his parents and 2 brothers shot in the street. My mother lost her entire family in the gas chambers. They survived Bergen-Belsen by pure chance and stubbornness. The rings," Marcus said. He really swallowed them every day. Every morning he'd swallow them. Every evening he'd retrieve them. The stomach acid wore down the gold, made them thinner and thinner. Other prisoners thought he was crazy, risking so much for 2 bands of metal. But my father said the rings reminded him that life existed beyond the barbed wire. That once he'd stood in a synagogue and promised to love Anna forever. The Nazis could take his dignity, his health, his family, but they couldn't take that promise. Dorothy's voice caught. "That's what people don't understand. The ring isn't valuable because of the gold. It's priceless because of what it cost to keep it." Marcus found tears running down his face. He didn't try to hide them. "When they came to America, did they start over?" "They tried. My father found work repairing watches in New York. They lived in a tiny apartment in Brooklyn, saved every penny. They had nightmares for years, both of them. Sometimes I'd hear my mother screaming in the night, and my father would hold her and sing Polish lullabies until she calmed down." Dorothy smiled sadly. "But they never stopped choosing each other, even when the memories were too much, even when the world felt too heavy. They held on to each other and these rings." "And your husband?" Marcus asked. "Harold? How did you meet him?" "At a library," Dorothy said, and her whole face softened. "I was 19, studying to be a teacher. He was 21, just back from Korea. He saw me reading a book about the Holocaust, trying to understand what my parents had survived. He sat down next to me and said, "That's heavy reading for such a young woman." I told him my parents' story. 3 hours later, we were still talking. She touched her ring again, that unconscious gesture of memory and love. On our first anniversary, I told him about my mother's ring, about what it meant. He looked at me and said, "Then I'll spend 50 years making sure it sees nothing but happiness." He kept that promise. Have you ever made a promise that changed your whole life? Have you ever loved someone so deeply that you'd endure anything to keep them? Let us know in the comments. Marcus couldn't speak. His throat was too tight. He thought about his ex-wife, about how quickly they'd given up when things got difficult. 3 years and done. He'd signed the papers without a second thought, relieved more than sad. They'd divided everything down to the dishes, turned love into a spreadsheet. And here was Dorothy, carrying 56 years of devotion on her finger, a ring worn thin by decades of choosing love over everything else. "I'm ashamed," he said finally. Not just of what I said yesterday, of how I've lived. I've spent 20 years acquiring things, measuring my worth in dollars, judging everyone by what they own. And I've learned nothing about what actually matters. Dorothy reached over and patted his hand. Her touch was light, papery with age, but warm. "You learned something today," she said. "That's a start. What happened to your parents?" Marcus asked. "Did they get to see you married?" "They both walked me down the aisle," Dorothy said. "My father cried through the whole ceremony. Afterward, he took Harold aside and showed him the rings, told him the story. He said, 'This is what love costs. This is what love survives. If you can't promise my daughter that kind of devotion, walk away now.'" She smiled. Harold promised. And he kept his word for 56 years. Did your parents live long enough to see that? My mother died when I was 35. Breast cancer. My father followed 6 months later. Heart attack, the doctor said. But I think it was a broken heart. He'd survived hell to be with her, and when she was gone, he didn't know how to be without her. Dorothy's eyes glistened. The day before he died, he asked to see my ring. He held it up to the light and said, "Look how beautiful. Not perfect, not pristine, but beautiful because it's been loved." Those were his last words to me. Marcus was openly crying now. He didn't care who saw. "Mrs. Fisher, I don't know what to say. I've been so blind." "Then open your eyes," Dorothy said simply. "That's all any of us can do. See what really matters. Choose what endures." They sat together in silence as the morning stretched into afternoon. Marcus called his assistant and canceled his meetings. For the first time in 20 years, something mattered more than a deal. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus Webb did something he'd never done before. He showed up. Every morning he'd arrive at Dorothy's apartment building with coffee and pastries, and they'd sit on that bench and talk. At first, Dorothy seemed bemused by this wealthy man's sudden attention, but gradually she opened up, sharing more stories about her parents, about Harold, about the life she'd built from the ashes of her family's trauma. Marcus learned that Dorothy volunteered at the Jewish Community Center 3 days a week, teaching Holocaust history to high school students. She showed him her parents' immigration papers, yellowed with age, and photographs from their early years in America. Samuel and Anna, young and scarred but determined. In every photo, even the earliest ones where their faces still carried the hollow look of camp survivors, they wore those thin gold rings. "Why do you teach the history?" Marcus asked one morning. They were in Dorothy's small apartment now. She'd invited him in, served him tea and chipped cups that had probably been her mother's. "Because forgetting is the second death," Dorothy said. "My parents survived so their story could be told. If I don't tell it, if I don't teach it, then Hitler wins after all. Every student who learns about the Holocaust, who understands what hate can do, that's a small victory against darkness." Marcus thought about his own life's work. Buildings, properties, profit margins. What would remain when he was gone? A real estate empire that would be sold off and scattered. No story worth telling. No victory against anything but his own insecurity. "I want to do something," he said suddenly. "For the center, for your work." "I want to help." Dorothy raised an eyebrow. "Help how?" "However you need. Funding, resources, whatever it takes." I have money that's just sitting in accounts, earning interest, meaning nothing. Let me use it for something that matters. Marcus, Dorothy said gently, you don't have to buy your way into meaning. I'm not trying to buy anything, he said, and realized it was true. I'm trying to build something real for the first time in my life. You showed me what real value looks like. Now let me try to create some. Dorothy studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded. All right, come with me tomorrow. I'm teaching a class on survivor testimony. Sit in the back and listen. Then we'll talk about what help really looks like. The next day, Marcus sat in a classroom of 16-year-olds at the Jewish Community Center and listened to Dorothy tell her parents' story. She spoke clearly, without drama, letting the facts carry their own weight. The students were ravaged when she showed them her ring, passing it carefully around the room so each student could hold it. Marcus saw teenagers with tears in their eyes, handling the thin band like the sacred relic it was. After class, a girl approached Dorothy. My grandmother was at Auschwitz, she said quietly. She never talks about it, but she wears a ring like yours. Now I understand why. Dorothy hugged the girl. Ask her about it, she said. Not in front of everyone. Just you and her. She might be ready to share. And if she's not, that's okay too. Just knowing you care might be enough. Marcus felt something fundamental shift inside him. This was meaning. This was worth, not in dollars or deals, but in stories preserved. In understanding passed down. In one generation reaching back to honor another. If you've been moved by Dorothy's story and want to hear more tales of resilience and love, subscribe to our channel. Over the following month, Marcus worked with the Jewish Community Center's director to establish a new wing for Holocaust education. Not as a tax write-off or a PR move, but as genuine penance and purpose. He funded a scholarship program for students studying genocide prevention. He hired filmmakers to record video testimonies from surviving family members before it was too late. And through it all, Dorothy guided him, teaching him the difference between charity for show and service from the heart. You're different now, his assistant remarked one afternoon. Calmer, less ruthless, Marcus suggested. I was going to say empty, she said. You seem like you've found something. He had. For the first time since his divorce, maybe for the first time in his entire adult life, Marcus Webb felt like he was building something that would outlast him. Something worthy of the worn gold band that had survived hell and taught him what real value meant. But one question still haunted him. One evening, sitting with Dorothy as the sun set over the senior apartment complex, he finally asked it. Do you think it's possible to change who you are? He said, really change, not just act differently? Dorothy was quiet for a moment. My father used to say that the camp showed him who people really were. Some became monsters, some became heroes. Most were somewhere in between, just trying to survive. But after liberation, he saw something else. He saw people choose who they'd become next. She looked at Marcus. You can't undo your past, Marcus. But you can decide what you build with your future. I've wasted so much time, he said. 20 years chasing nothing. Then don't waste another day, Dorothy said simply. Start now. Choose better. That night, Marcus sat in his penthouse and made a list. Not of assets or investments, but of amends. His ex-wife, whom he'd blamed entirely for their failed marriage. Employees he'd fired callously. Business partners he'd betrayed for profit. The list grew long. He couldn't fix everything, but he could try. He could choose better, just as Dorothy's father had chosen love over hate after surviving the unsurvivable. The next morning, he started making calls. 6 months after that first conversation on the bench, Marcus stood in the newly opened Samuel and Anna Memorial Hall at the Jewish Community Center. The room was filled with photographs, testimony videos, and artifacts from Holocaust survivors and their families. At the center of the main display, behind protective glass, sat 2 rings. Dorothy's ring, the one her mother had worn through Bergen-Belsen and beyond, and Harold's ring, retrieved from his grave with Dorothy's permission. They sat side by side, thin and imperfect and absolutely priceless. The dedication ceremony was small and intimate. Dorothy sat in the front row, her hands folded in her lap, wearing a new ring Marcus had given her, not as a replacement, but as a companion to her mother's. It was inscribed with Harold's last words to her. See you in the morning. She wore both rings now. One on each hand, old love and new love survived grief and continuing hope. Marcus gave a short speech. He talked about the day he'd mocked an old woman's wedding ring and how that cruelty had become the greatest gift of his life. He talked about learning, too late and not too late at the same time, what real wealth looked like. He cried openly as he spoke about Samuel swallowing gold rings to preserve love in a place designed to destroy it. The audience cried with him. After the ceremony, students lined up to talk to Dorothy, to ask questions, to understand. Marcus watched from the side, no longer the center of attention, finally comfortable in the background. A young woman approached him, maybe 22, with thoughtful eyes. "I'm Rachel," she said. "Dorothy's great-granddaughter. She talks about you a lot." Marcus smiled. "Good things, I hope. She says you're proof that people can change. That even when we're lost, we can find our way back to what matters." Rachel paused. "My great-grandmother doesn't give second chances easily. The fact that she gave you one, that you took it seriously, that means something." "She saved my life," Marcus said simply. "I was drowning in wealth and dying of meaninglessness. She threw me a line I didn't deserve. We all deserve chances to be better," Rachel said. "That's what she teaches us. That's what her parents' survival meant. Not just that they lived, but that they chose to love after horror. That they chose to build after destruction. You're part of that legacy now." That evening, after the crowd had gone and the lights were dimmed, Marcus sat alone in the memorial hall. He looked at those two thin rings under glass and thought about the journey they'd taken. From Warsaw to Bergen-Belsen to Brooklyn to a small apartment where they'd witnessed 56 years of marriage. From his callous mockery to this moment of reverence. Full circle, redeemed by honesty and effort, and the grace of an old woman who'd chosen to teach rather than condemn. His phone buzzed. His assistant, asking about tomorrow's schedule. A year ago, he would have had back-to-back meetings, deals to close, empires to expand. Now his calendar showed teaching commitments, volunteer work, coffee with Dorothy. He'd sold his penthouse and moved to a modest apartment near the center. He drove a sensible car. He wore his father's old watch instead of the Rolex. None of these changes had diminished him. Instead, he felt fuller, richer, more alive than ever. Dorothy found him there, sitting in the quiet. "I thought you'd still be here," she said, settling into the chair beside him. "Big day." "Thank you," Marcus said. "For everything. For not giving up on me when you had every right to." "I saw something in you that day," Dorothy said, "when you came back to apologize. Most people who hurt me just disappear, too ashamed or too proud to face what they've done. You came back. That took courage. It took you," Marcus said. "Your story, your parents' sacrifice, your choice to keep loving even after loss. You showed me what I'd been missing my whole life," Dorothy smiled. "And what was that?" "Purpose," Marcus said. "Connection. The understanding that we're here to care for each other, to preserve each other's stories, to choose love over profit." Every single time. They sat together in comfortable silence, two people from different worlds brought together by gold worn thin and grace given freely. Outside, the city hummed with its usual chaos, people racing through their lives, measuring worth in all the wrong ways. But in this quiet room, surrounded by stories of survival and love, Marcus Webb finally understood what it meant to be rich. Before Dorothy left, she took Marcus's hand and squeezed it gently. "My parents would have liked you," she said. "Not the man you were, maybe, but the man you're becoming. They believed in transformation. They lived it. I hope I'm worthy of their story," Marcus said. "You make it living by honoring it," Dorothy said. "That's all any of us can do. Honor the love that came before us and try to create more love for those who come after." She left, and Marcus remained a moment longer. He looked at his own hands, empty of rings, but full of purpose now. He thought about calling his ex-wife, about the apology he'd written and rewritten 100 times. He thought about the students he'd help next week, the stories they'd share, the understanding that would grow. He thought about Samuel swallowing those rings every morning, about Anna playing violin in Warsaw before the world ended, about Dorothy wearing thin gold every day for 56 years as a promise to remember. And he thought about the man he'd been 6 months ago. Cruel and empty and blind, and the man he was becoming. Slower and humbler, and finally beginning to see. The gold had worn thin, not from weakness, but from love. And maybe, Marcus thought, that's what happened to all of us if we were lucky. We wore down our sharp edges through years of devotion. We let life smooth our pride into something softer and truer. We survived not by staying hard, but by staying open. Not by protecting ourselves, but by giving ourselves away to the people and purposes that mattered most. If you've been moved by Dorothy and Marcus's journey, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment sharing what this story means to you, and subscribe to our channel for more tales of hope, transformation, and the enduring power of love. Thank you for joining us today. May you find your own thin gold, worn beautiful by the years and precious beyond measure. Remember, it's never too late to change, to see clearly, to choose what really matters. We'll see you in the next story.